I'm Rachel Morgan, 34 years old, mother to two of the brightest lights in my life, Liam and Sophie. They're 9-year-old twins who couldn't be more different if they tried. Liam is my quiet artist, always bent over a sketch pad or tinkering with some little contraption he's made from scrap cardboard and tape. He has this gentle, thoughtful nature that can make him vulnerable in a world that doesn't slow down for sensitive souls. Sophie, on the other hand, was born ready to take on the world. She's quick to laugh, quicker to speak her mind, and absolutely fearless when it comes to standing up for what she thinks is right. For the past year and a half, it's been just the three of us. I'd been married for 11 years to a man who started out charming and dependable, but over time became a stranger to me, a stranger who eventually walked away. The divorce was ugly in ways that paperwork can't capture. We had built our lives around his high-earning sales job, which allowed me to work part-time as a maternity nurse so I could be there for the twins. But when the marriage ended, so did the stability. I walked away with shared custody, a small child support check, and a savings account that looked more like a bad joke than a safety net. It was my parents, Evelyn and Howard, who offered the solution. "You and the kids can stay here until you get back on your feet," my father had said, resting a hand on my shoulder in that way he uses when he wants to sound generous. Family looks out for each other. I wish I could say it was an easy decision, but the truth is, my relationship with my parents has always been complicated. My mother is the type who remembers every slight and plays favorites without ever admitting she does. My father, well, he believes himself to be fair, but in practice, his idea of fairness often meant making life easier for my younger brother, Christopher. Christopher has always been the golden child, the one who got the bigger slice of pie, the better bicycle at Christmas, the benefit of every doubt. Even when he flunked out of college his sophomore year, my parents were there to smooth over the embarrassment, fronting the money for him to start a small business. It worked out for him. He's now making 6 figures in tech consulting, but it also reinforced the idea that no matter what mistakes he made, the safety net would always be there. Me? I was the dependable one, the one who got good grades without being asked, who went to nursing school without borrowing a dime from my parents, who never missed a shift at work even when I was sick. If I ever resented the imbalance, I learned to swallow it down. That's just how things were in our family. Still, when they offered me the guest room, I accepted. I told myself it was temporary, just long enough to build up my savings and find a decent place in a good school district for Liam and Sophie. The twins were excited at first. My parents converted a small den into their shared bedroom, and I made the guest room mine. I contributed to groceries, cooked most of the meals, and made sure the kids respected their grandparents' routines. In those first weeks, there was something almost comforting about having extra hands to help with school drop-offs and pickups when I worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital. On nights when I was scheduled back-to-back, my mother would give the twins dinner and tuck them in. I told myself this was good for them, to have more family around, but there was always an undercurrent I couldn't quite ignore. It was in the way my mother's face lit up when Christopher came by, in the tone my father used when he talked about his son's latest project, as though Christopher were some prodigy. It wasn't that they treated my children badly, at least not yet. It was just that their enthusiasm for Christopher's life always seemed to overshadow mine. I'd spent years making peace with being the one in the background, the steady one, the one who didn't need rescuing. But now, after the divorce, I found myself back under the same roof where those patterns had been set in stone. And deep down, I worried what it might mean for Liam and Sophie to grow up in the same shadow I had. One Saturday afternoon, about a month after we moved in, we were sitting around the kitchen table. Sophie was telling my parents about the science fair project she wanted to do, something with magnets and floating objects. My father nodded politely but kept glancing at his phone. My mother, mid-sentence about how busy she was, perked up when her phone buzzed. "That's Christopher," she said, smiling before she'd even read the message. "He and Vanessa are coming over tonight. And guess what? Vanessa's pregnant. They just found out." The announcement was met with gasps and congratulations, of course. My father stood and clapped his hands together like a man who'd just heard he'd won the lottery. Sophie and Liam exchanged a look, sensing instantly that the mood in the room had shifted. From that moment on, the countdown to the arrival of Oliver, the first and, according to my parents, most important grandchild, began. Never mind that Liam and Sophie had been their only grandchildren for nearly a decade. My mother ordered baby furniture for a nursery that didn't exist in their home, bought clothes and toys, and spent long afternoons shopping for strollers with Vanessa. The favoritism wasn't blatant in those early days, but it was there in subtle ways. My mother's calendar was suddenly full of doctor visits with Vanessa, even if it meant canceling plans to take Sophie to soccer practice or missing Liam's art exhibit at school. My father began calling Christopher every other day, just to check in, while I often had to track him down to discuss something as basic as a home repair. I told myself it was just the excitement of a new baby, that once Oliver was born, things would even out again. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I was watching a story I already knew by heart. The script was the same one I'd grown up with, only now it wasn't me being overshadowed. It was my children. And if there's one thing motherhood had taught me, it's that the hurts we can endure ourselves become unbearable when they're aimed at our kids. I began to notice the little things. The way Sophie's stories at dinner were met with distracted nods, while Vanessa's anecdotes about Oliver's latest ultrasound got full attention. The way Liam's carefully drawn birthday card for my mother was set aside, but a store-bought mug from Christopher was displayed prominently on the kitchen shelf. The offhand comments about how Oliver would carry on the Morgan name, as though my children were somehow less legitimate heirs to the family line. Still, I stayed quiet. Because we needed the roof over our heads. Because daycare would cost more than I could afford if I lost my parents' help with school pickups. Because I told myself that this was temporary and I could shield Liam and Sophie from most of it. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice was whispering, "You know how this ends. You've lived it before." What I didn't know then was just how far my parents' favoritism would go, and how quickly a living arrangement meant to be a lifeline would turn into a battleground. Oliver arrived in early spring, a plump, red-faced bundle wrapped in a hospital blanket. And from the moment my parents laid eyes on him, it was as though the world had rearranged itself to orbit around his crib. Vanessa and Christopher brought him home to their spacious two-story across town, but my parents behaved as if he lived under their roof. My mother's phone was filled with nothing but photos of Oliver, each one accompanied by commentary that could rival a royal birth announcement. My father, who had barely noticed Liam's soccer games or Sophie's band recitals, could recite Oliver's feeding schedule as if it were a matter of national security. I wanted to be gracious. I told myself over and over that new babies are intoxicating. Everyone wants to hold them, coo over them, claim some small part of their arrival. I encouraged Liam and Sophie to be patient with their grandparents, to understand that Oliver needed a lot of attention right now. But patience wears thin when kindness is one-sided. The first cracks appeared at Easter. My mother had gone all out for Oliver's very first holiday. Tiny tailored vest, personalized Easter basket, a professional photographer snapping photos in the backyard. Liam and Sophie's baskets, once overflowing with toys and treats, looked, well, modest. They didn't say anything, but I saw Sophie's smile falter when she noticed the difference. I pretended not to see, swallowing my anger for the sake of keeping the peace. It wasn't just gifts. Vanessa and Christopher began dropping Oliver off at my parents' house for entire afternoons, so they could bond. And every time the household bent itself to fit Oliver's needs. If Sophie was practicing her trumpet, she was told to stop because Oliver needed to nap. If Liam was drawing at the kitchen table, he had to move because Vanessa needed space to spread out Oliver's toys. One Friday evening, Liam came home from school practically glowing. His art teacher had chosen one of his paintings, a bright, messy explosion of colors, to represent the school at a county-wide student exhibition. He'd been working on it for weeks, pouring himself into it in a way that made me proud beyond words. "Grandma, look," he said, holding the painting up as we walked into the living room. My mother barely looked up from her conversation with Vanessa. "That's nice, sweetheart," she said, before turning back to discuss fabric swatches for Oliver's nursery. I saw the light dim in his eyes. Sophie noticed it too. Later that night, she whispered to me, "They don't really care about us anymore, do they?" I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to believe she was wrong. But I'd lived long enough under that roof to know the truth. Once my parents decided who deserved their attention, there was no competing for it. By early summer, my parents' subtle bias had turned into open criticism toward me and toward my children. They questioned my parenting constantly, the food I gave the twins, their bedtime, how much screen time they had. Meanwhile, Christopher and Vanessa could do no wrong, even when they showed up hours late for family dinner or canceled plans at the last minute. "It's different for them," my mother explained once, as though I were too dense to understand. "They have a baby. That's exhausting." I bit back the urge to remind her that I'd been a single parent to twins for nearly a decade without ever using exhaustion as an excuse to disregard other people's time. Every month, I inched closer to my goal. I picked up extra shifts, put every spare dollar into my savings account, tracked our progress on a chart taped inside my closet. I'd promised Liam and Sophie that by Christmas we'd be in our own place, but the tension in the house was like a tightening rope. Every time I thought it had reached its limit, someone gave it another hard tug. The tug came in September, wrapped in polite smiles and an innocent request. Christopher and Vanessa were renovating their house. Something about knocking down walls to create an open-concept kitchen, and needed a place to stay just for 6 to 8 weeks. I didn't even have time to object before my father said, "Of course you'll stay here. We have plenty of room." I looked around, mentally counting the bodies. Me, my 2 kids, my parents, and now Christopher, Vanessa, and Oliver. That made 7 people in a house that already felt cramped. "We're already tight on space," I said carefully. "Family helps family, Rachel?" my mother snapped, her tone making it clear that discussion was over. By the following weekend, Christopher and Vanessa had moved in as though they owned the place. Oliver's crib took over one of the upstairs bedrooms. Vanessa's clothes filled an entire closet my mother had emptied for her, while my own wardrobe was still crammed into a small dresser I'd bought secondhand. And then came the rules. Liam and Sophie were told to keep their voices down at all hours because Oliver might be napping. Their toys were banished from the living room, labeled as clutter, and the television they'd been allowed to watch after school now played Vanessa's shows exclusively. The final straw that week came one sunny afternoon. Sophie was in the backyard, skipping rope, counting her jumps aloud the way she always did. She came inside a few minutes later, her cheeks flushed, not from the exercise, but from holding back tears. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked. "Grandma told me to stop," she said, her voice trembling. She said I was too loud, but Oliver wasn't even sleeping. He was watching cartoons with Aunt Vanessa. I wanted to tell her it didn't matter. But the truth is, it did matter. It mattered every single time my children were told to shrink themselves to make room for someone else's comfort. I'd been patient. I'd been careful. I'd been quiet. But I could feel something shifting inside me, a slow, steady burn that I knew one day would ignite. And when it did, there would be no putting it out. By the time October rolled around, the house felt less like a home and more like a pressure cooker. Every day the air seemed thicker, the walls closer, the silences heavier. I'd been telling myself we only had to make it until Christmas, but somewhere deep down, I knew I was lying. You can't just wait out a situation that's rotting from the inside. The day it happened started like any other. Me racing out the door before sunrise, coffee in hand, heading to another 12-hour shift at the maternity ward. The hospital was short-staffed, and I was covering more patients than I could reasonably manage, but I didn't complain. The extra shifts were padding my savings, getting us closer to freedom. It was just past lunch when I finally checked my phone. I had 3 missed calls from Liam, 2 from Sophie, and a string of texts that made my blood run cold. From Liam: "Mom, something weird is happening. Grandpa and Uncle Chris are moving our stuff." From Sophie: "Grandma says we have to move to the basement. This is not fair." From Liam: "Mom, please come home. They took all our things downstairs." From Sophie: "I hate it here. The basement is cold and gross. There are spiders." I called the house immediately. No answer. Called both kids, straight to voicemail. My hands shook as I texted Sophie: "I'll be home as soon as I can. Stay calm. I love you both." I went straight to my supervisor and explained it was a family emergency. She nodded, already signaling for another nurse to take my patients. Still, it took me an hour to hand off everything properly before I could leave. The drive home was a blur of red lights and worst-case scenarios. When I finally pulled into the driveway, my stomach was knotted so tightly I could barely breathe. Liam and Sophie were on the living room couch, eyes red and puffy. My mother was in the kitchen with Vanessa, sipping tea as if it were any other Tuesday. Christopher and my father were nowhere in sight. "What's going on?" I demanded, kneeling in front of my kids. "They moved all our stuff to the basement without asking," Sophie blurted, her voice cracking. "They said we don't deserve the good rooms upstairs." My heart thudded so loudly I could barely hear. "Who said that?" "Grandpa," Liam mumbled, staring down at his hands. "He said Uncle Chris's family needs more space because they're more important right now." I stood, my legs feeling like steel rods. I walked into the kitchen. My mother didn't even look up. "Why are my children's belongings in the basement?" I asked. Vanessa set her teacup down with deliberate care. "We needed more space for Oliver's nursery and my home office. The basement's perfectly fine." It's damp, it's cold, it has mold in one corner, and the window doesn't even open, I said, my voice low and even. Not to mention Liam has asthma. My mother finally met my eyes, her expression calm in a way that felt rehearsed. The children are older. They can adapt more easily than a baby. Besides, our other grandson deserves the best rooms. He's here all day while yours are at school. It was so casually cruel that for a moment I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, taking in the woman who had raised me and realizing, truly realizing, how little she valued my children. They will not sleep in that basement, I said finally. My father and Christopher came in through the back door just then. Oh, good, you're home, my father said. We've made some changes we need to discuss. There's nothing to discuss, I replied. You moved my kids without my permission. Put their things back. Christopher shrugged. All false reason. We need the upstairs space. Oliver's getting more mobile. He needs room to develop properly. Plus, Vanessa needs a quiet space for work calls. And my children need safe bedrooms. I shot back. They should be grateful they have a place to stay at all, my father said, as though we were squatters instead of family. That was the moment something inside me settled into absolute clarity. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to plead. I wasn't even going to shout. I was simply going to end it. I turned back to Liam and Sophie, who were still watching from the couch, eyes wide and anxious. Pack your bags, I told them, my voice steady. They blinked at me, confused. What? Sophie asked. You heard me? I said gently. Pack your bags. We're leaving. From behind me, my father barked, Don't be ridiculous. No one's asking you to leave. I faced him, calm as ice. No, you're not asking. You've already told us in every way that matters that we don't belong here. Vanessa laughed under her breath. You're overreacting. It's just a bedroom. I turned to her. Would you call it just a bedroom if someone shoved your child into a cold, moldy basement without asking you first? She had no answer for that. Go on, kids, I told Liam and Sophie. Backpacks with your most important things. We'll come back for the rest later. As they hurried upstairs, the kitchen fell silent except for the sound of my mother's spoon stirring her tea. The casual dismissal, the entitlement, the sheer gall, it all slid off me like rain. I was done. 5 minutes later, my children were back, backpacks slung over their shoulders, Sophie clutching her trumpet case, Liam holding the stuffed fox he'd had since he was 3. We're ready, Mom, Sophie said, her chin lifted just a little higher than usual, and with that, we walked out the door. The evening air felt different the moment we stepped outside, cooler, sharper, and strangely freeing. I loaded the kids' bags into the back seat of my car while they climbed in without a word. Through the living room window, I could see my parents and Christopher standing there, watching us as though I'd just announced I was moving to another planet. Halfway down the driveway, my mother came running out, her robe tied hastily at the waist. Rachel, don't be dramatic. Come back inside and we'll talk about it tomorrow. I rolled the window down just enough to look at her. Tomorrow, I'll be here to get the rest of our things. Tonight, we're leaving. But where will you go? She pressed, genuine worry flickering across her face for the first time that day. Somewhere my children are valued, I said simply, and drove away. The kids were quiet for the first few minutes, staring out their respective windows. Finally, Liam asked, Are we really moving? Almost, I told him. Our new house isn't ready until next week. We're going to stay with my friend Clara until then. Sophie shifted in her seat. Is it because of what Grandpa and Grandma did? I took a breath, choosing my words. It's because we deserve to live somewhere we're respected. What happened today showed me we couldn't wait any longer. When we pulled into Clara's driveway 20 minutes later, the porch light was already on. She stepped outside before I'd even turned off the engine. "You're here," she said warmly, ushering us inside. "Guest room's ready, and I blew up an air mattress for the kids. There's ice cream in the freezer and a movie queued up." It wasn't much, but the way Liam's shoulders eased and Sophie actually smiled told me it was exactly what we needed. That night, the three of us slept in the same room, their breathing steady beside me. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet, feeling the kind of peace I hadn't known in years. The next morning, over coffee, Clara asked, "What's the plan?" "I was going to give my parents notice next week," I admitted. "But after yesterday, there's no going back. We'll pack the rest of our things today and be out for good." "You want me to watch the kids while you deal with them?" she offered. "No," I said. "They need to see this through. I want them to know we're doing this together." By the time we pulled up to my parents' house at 10, I'd rehearsed my composure like armor. My father opened the door, looking as if he hadn't slept. "Come to apologize for your tantrum?" he asked flatly. "No," I said. "We're here to get our things." Inside, my mother sat on the couch, red-eyed, avoiding my gaze. "Christopher and Vanessa took Oliver to the park," she said. "They thought it would be less tense. I sent the kids upstairs with instructions. Pack what you love, what you need. We can replace the rest." When they were gone, my mother turned to me. "I can't believe you're doing this to us." "I'm not doing anything to you," I said evenly. "I'm doing something for my children." My father paced the room. "This is about Christopher, isn't it? You've always been jealous of him." "This is about my kids being moved to a damp basement without my consent," I replied. "It's about you telling them, literally, that their cousin deserves better rooms than they do." "You're twisting our words," my mother said sharply. "I'm quoting you," I said. Upstairs, the sound of zippers and muffled voices signaled that the twins were nearly done. We made several trips to the car. My father hovered by the door on our last pass. "Where are you even going to live? How will you afford it on your nurse's salary?" I set the bags down and looked him in the eye. "I make $65,000 a year. I have excellent credit and very little debt. I've been saving for almost 2 years. We'll be fine." He blinked, as if this were entirely new information, because to him, it was. He'd never bothered to ask. In the kitchen, my mother stood with her coffee cup, her expression caught between sadness and disbelief. "We're family," she said quietly. "Yes," I agreed, "and family should make each other feel valued. Jack and Sophie haven't felt that here in a long time." She looked away. When the last bag was in the car, I told them we'd visit when there was mutual respect. No promises beyond that. Liam and Sophie gave polite, distant goodbyes, and we drove off for the second and last time. At Clara's, the kids seemed lighter almost immediately. They laughed at dinner, sprawled across the living room floor with puzzles, and didn't once glance over their shoulders like they had in my parents' house. I called the landlord for our new rental and asked if we could move in 2 days early. He agreed. On Friday, with the help of Clara and a few co-workers, we carried our things into a small 3-bedroom house with scuffed floors, a tiny backyard, and sunlight that spilled across the kitchen in the afternoon. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. That first night, I stood in the doorway of the twins' rooms as they unpacked. Liam carefully arranging his sketchbooks on a shelf, Sophie setting her trumpet case by her bed. "How does it feel?" I asked. Sophie grinned. "Like we can breathe here." It was the kind of answer that tells you, without a shadow of doubt, you've made the right decision. Our first week in the new house was a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Exhaustion from the moving, the unpacking, the endless errands that come with starting over. Relief from waking up in a place where my children could stretch, talk, and simply exist without being told they were too loud, too messy, too much. Every night that week, I made a point of eating dinner with Liam and Sophie at our little secondhand table, no matter how long my shift had been. We'd light the cheap vanilla candle Sophie picked out at the dollar store, and each of us would share one good thing from the day. It became our quiet ritual, a reminder that we were building something of our own. By the end of the month, the changes in the kids were unmistakable. Liam started sketching again, not just at the table, but sprawled on the living room rug, humming softly to himself. Sophie practiced her trumpet without hesitation, the sound carrying through the house like a declaration. Their laughter came more easily, their shoulders less tense. It didn't take long for news of our move to ripple through the family. Some called to check in, to say they understood. Others, not so much. My mother's first text was a blend of guilt and indignation. "You could have handled this better. You made us look bad." I ignored it. The second week, Clara forwarded me a message she'd gotten from my brother, asking if I was still mad and whether I'd calmed down enough to talk like adults. I ignored that too. And then, the calls started coming from my parents. Not for me, but for help. It began with my mother's voice on the phone one Thursday evening, unusually tired. "I don't suppose you could watch Oliver for a few hours this weekend. Vanessa has a work trip, and Christopher's got some big meeting." I cut her off gently. "I can't. I'm working both days." A pause. "Oh, well, it's just that we've been trying to keep up, and he's a handful." I almost laughed. It had never occurred to her, apparently, that a baby would be a handful without someone else doing the bulk of the work. Over the next month, I heard through Aunt Janice, the unofficial family newswire, that Christopher and Vanessa were struggling. Without me there to pick up slack, the perfect household they'd built in everyone's eyes had cracks showing. Oliver was in daycare more, Christopher was complaining about missed deadlines, and my mother, now in her 60s, was feeling the strain of constant babysitting. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward. In late November, my supervisor called me into her office with an offer I hadn't expected for another couple of years: a promotion to senior nurse, better pay, a set schedule, fewer overnight shifts. It wasn't just a raise, it was a reclaiming of time with my kids. That night, I told Liam and Sophie over spaghetti at our little table. Sophie nearly knocked over her water glass in excitement. "Does that mean you can come to my winter concert?" she asked. "It means I can come to all your concerts," I said. It also meant we could start looking at buying a place sooner than I'd thought. I didn't tell them yet. Some things, I'd learned, are sweeter when you keep them in your pocket until they're real. In December, my parents asked us to Sunday dinner. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Partly to test the waters, partly because I wanted the kids to see that we could visit without living under their roof. The atmosphere was different. Christopher and Vanessa were subdued, Oliver fussy and clingy. My mother didn't bark orders at Sophie, didn't criticize Liam's table manners. My father even asked Liam about his art, and actually listen to the answer. Still, there were moments. Vanessa complained about the mess Oliver made and how she couldn't get anything done. Christopher hinted that if I'd stayed, things could have been easier for everyone. I smiled politely and let the words slide right off me. After dinner, as we were leaving, my mother pulled me aside. "You seem happy?" she said, almost as if it were a surprise. "I am," I told her. "And so are the kids." She nodded, looking away. I could tell she didn't quite know how to process that. By New Year's, the twist had fully taken shape. We were thriving. They were floundering without their dependable daughter and sister to quietly keep things running. And deep down, I think they were starting to realize that what they'd taken for granted, my labor, my presence, my silence, had been holding more together than they'd ever admitted. I didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. The point was, for the first time in years, I had the upper hand, not in some petty family competition, but in my own life. I'd stopped playing the role they'd written for me, and in doing so, I'd rewritten the script entirely. And I wasn't about to hand the pen back. By spring, life had taken on a rhythm that felt solid, predictable in the best way. Liam's art teacher had invited him to join an after-school program for gifted students, and he'd thrown himself into it, coming home with charcoal smudges on his fingers and that quiet, content smile I loved so much. Sophie had made the advanced band and was already talking about trying out for the soccer team. I'd been tucking a little extra away every month from my new paycheck, not for rent, but for something bigger. At first, it felt almost impossible to imagine. Buying a home had been one of those someday dreams, the kind you keep tucked on a shelf because life has a way of knocking it over. And then, in April, a listing popped up in our neighborhood. A small 3-bedroom house with a postage stamp backyard, nothing fancy but well kept, and priced just low enough that I could make the numbers work. I called the realtor that same day. By the end of the week, my offer was accepted. When I told Liam and Sophie, their faces lit up in a way I'll remember for the rest of my life. They peppered me with questions. Could they paint their rooms? Could we plant flowers in the backyard? Could we finally get a dog? "We'll see," I told them, but I think they both knew I was already picturing it too. The process brought my father back into the picture in a way I didn't expect. Word had traveled, courtesy of Aunt Janice, that I was buying a house. A few days later, my father called and asked if he could look over the inspection report with me. He showed up with a yellow legal pad, glasses perched low on his nose. "Roof's got a good 5 years left," he said, scanning the papers. "Water heater might go sooner. Keep a cushion for that." It was the most practical, non-judgmental conversation we'd had in years. And when he stood to leave, he paused in the doorway. "I'm proud of you, Rachel," he said, almost as if the words surprised him on the way out. "Buying a house on your own? That's no small thing." For a moment, I just stared at him, because in 34 years, I couldn't remember hearing those exact words from his mouth. "Thank you, Dad," I managed. He cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have talked. We didn't handle things well before. I can't change it, but I'd like to do better." It wasn't an apology, not in the full, unvarnished sense, but coming from my father, it was monumental. We closed on the house in early May. I signed the papers alone in a quiet office, the keys cool and heavy in my palm. Standing in the empty living room later, sunlight spilling across the bare floor, I felt something shift in my chest. A release. like I'd been holding my breath for 2 years and could finally let it out. 2 years ago, I'd been a newly divorced mother, dependent on my parents' conditional generosity. Now, I was a homeowner, advancing in my career, and most importantly, giving my children a place that was truly theirs. The day we moved in, friends and coworkers came to help, hauling boxes, assembling furniture, laughing in the way people do when they're building something together. My parents came too. My mother didn't criticize where I put the dishes. My father didn't offer better ways to arrange the furniture. They just helped. That evening, the four of us, me, Liam, Sophie, and the house, settled into our new life. I tucked the kids into their own rooms, kissed their foreheads, and stood for a moment in the hallway listening to the sound of them breathing in a home that belonged to us. It was quiet, yes, but it wasn't the heavy quiet of holding your tongue. It was the kind that feels safe. The first night in our new home, I stood on the back porch after the kids had gone to bed, a cup of tea warming my hands, and watched the last of the daylight fade over our small backyard. The grass was patchy, the fence needed paint, and there was a stubborn old oak tree whose roots had probably been here longer than the house itself. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Inside, Liam had already covered half his bedroom wall with sketches, robots, landscapes, strange little creatures only he could dream up. Sophie had lined her trumpet case in the corner, already plotting her practice schedule for the week. They were claiming their spaces without hesitation, as if they'd been waiting for this all their lives. Over the following weeks, life settled into something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just routine, but peace. There were no whispered reminders to keep your voices down, no silent calculations about whether my children were being compared to someone else in the next room. Just mornings that began with pancakes or cereal, afternoons that ended with homework at the kitchen table, and evenings where the sound of Sophie's trumpet or Liam's pencil scratching over paper filled the air. The distance from my parents gave all of us room to breathe, and maybe, for them, to think. We still saw each other, cautiously. Sunday dinners became monthly, with boundaries everyone understood. Respect my kids, or we leave. My mother, slowly but noticeably, began to ask Liam about his art, to attend Sophie's band performances. My father still stumbled over conversations that edged toward the past, but now and then, I'd catch him watching the twins with a softness I hadn't seen before. One afternoon, months after the move, Sophie asked me point blank, "Mom, why do you think Grandma and Grandpa treated us differently than Oliver?" I set down the dish I was drying and thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes," I said, "people get fixed ideas about who's special, and they don't see they're being unfair. Grandma and Grandpa always saw Uncle Chris as someone to take care of, and when he had Oliver, they put that same energy into him. But we're their grandkids too," Liam said from the table, looking up from his drawing. "Yes, you are," I said. "And they do love you. They just didn't always show it in ways that felt good or fair. That's why we left. Because everyone deserves to be treated with respect and kindness. And when that wasn't happening, we had to make our own space." They nodded, quiet but thoughtful. In late summer, we painted the front door a cheerful red, planted marigolds in the yard, and adopted a rescue dog, a floppy-eared mutt the kids named Max. Watching them run through the yard with Max that first weekend, I felt a kind of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with reclamation. Because this was never about punishing my parents. It was about showing my children, and maybe reminding myself, that you don't have to accept a place where you're diminished just because someone calls it family. Family, I'd learned, isn't just about blood or history. It's about mutual respect. It's about choosing every day to value each other. The day we left my parents' house, it had felt like an ending. But standing there on the porch now, Max snoozing at my feet and the kids laughing in the yard, I realized it had been the beginning of self-respect, of stability, of showing my children what it means to walk away from what hurts you and toward what heals you. We had come through the storm, and now, finally, we were standing on solid ground. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.